Hi, everybody. Welcome to this episode of Said Differently. This is your show about bringing your company's story to market through messaging focused on B2B. And I am your host, Jennifer Sikora. The show is sponsored by Troupe. We have today as our guest Hannah Pickering, who is a fantastic product marketer. Troupe met recently. I say recently, but whenever you listen to this, who knows when that will be. But we met her at the New York City Product Marketing Alliance Summit. And she's an ambassador for them, and she has a long history as a product marketer. Got her start as a journalist, so we kind of bonded over that. But Hannah, why don't you introduce yourself a bit more on what you're up to right now?
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me, Jennifer, and hello to the audience watching this at any point in time in the future. Like Jennifer said, I did not start out in product marketing, much like many of my product marketing peers. I really am a journalist turned marketer. I didn't know in the beginning what exactly I wanted to do, but I knew what my why was, elevating stories that matter, making people really stop and pay attention to a story and really feel something and do something as a result. Along the way, I pivoted from journalism to marketing. I found my groove in content and growth marketing. I really became a T-shaped marketer and wore a lot of different hats, which was fun. But what stayed consistent through all of that was using story. And I like to think of it as the art of persuasion to
Oh,
get people to take notice of something and to understand something better.
yeah.
I turned to product marketing because I really wanted to spend more of my day today helping people understand and use really amazing products and really finding the bridge there. Along the way, I discovered that I was also equally passionate about helping people building the product, get to understand their customers in new and different ways,
Mhm.
not just as buyers or users of the product, but really as humans. And
Yeah.
that's really helped because along the way, I've had the opportunity to work in organizations that are tackling really big, meaningful problems that impact the lives of millions of people, ourselves included. So everything from helping people build financial security to accessing affordable healthcare. Being part of that bigger mission gives me and my work a sense of purpose, which is incredibly fulfilling.
That's
It
cool.
also means you approach things like messaging differently, which I know
Yeah.
we're going to talk about today. I'm actually starting a new role. Well, it will not be new anymore when you all listen to this. Actually coming back to a company that I was at before that I'm really excited about. It's a company called HealthEquity. So they may come up in the conversation as director of product marketing. So coming back to a team I was once on to really help scale it and take it to the next level.
Oh, well, that's great. I'm excited for your next opportunity, Hannah. And yeah, the topic, as you kind of hinted at today, is really around, how we bring our messages to market in really regulated industries. And there's a lot of complexity around that, not just in terms of all the different sort of language compliance things that you need to think about, but there's also persona level complexity, right? It's not just B2B. It's very, very often in these industries, B2B to C. And so there's an extension of those personas, and we're going to touch on that as well. I've only had a very brief stint in my storied career of working in a regulated B2B to C environment. I was with a telehealth platform that helped company people connect with dermatologists online to do asynchronous visits. It's called Dermatologist on Call. It's still around. And I remember for the first time having to face all of these different sort of, as a marketer, you kind of had to think about the specific wording choices that you used, but you also were thinking about not just marketing to the providers that we were trying to get into our network, but thinking about it for this from the perspective of the end consumer as well. So I know you have been spending a lot of time there, and so a lot of markets fall into this, like healthcare, insurance, financial services, even legal services, real estate. So I guess for those who haven't been in those types of industries, can you give like one or two like really specific examples of a message or messaging challenge that might hit up against that sort of regulatory, you know, issue?
Absolutely. I was thinking about this, and there's actually a lot of examples I had. There
I'm
was one
sure.
that is top of mind that I'll actually share too. The first was a situation where I was launching as a PMM behind the launch of a new brokerage account product. So essentially giving people that are investing another way to invest. And if you ever invested through a brokerage account, it's basically that front door that's going to allow you to access stocks, bonds, mutual funds, ETFs, all different types of investment vehicles to
Yeah.
hopefully grow and build more wealth. One of the ideas behind that offering was, hey, we want to give people more choice, more flexibility and opportunities, but it also opens the door to greater opportunity to grow how much you have invested. When I started working on the messaging for that product, though, there was a lot of back and forth on how we talked about the benefits of the offering
Okay.
without making a promise, either
Ah,
are articulated explicitly or not, that hey, if you invest through this brokerage account, you have the opportunity to potentially see positive growth in your balance. If you work for a company in the financial space, you really can never make a promise to your end customer that by
yeah.
doing X, your balance is going to grow immediately from 10 to 15, especially when it comes to investing. There's a lot of volatility. You never know if you put your money in a fund and that the fund value goes down. So
Yeah.
a lot of back and forth with our compliance and legal teams on what are the benefits we can articulate in our messaging that we can stand behind, that we feel comfortable making, that won't put us or our customer sort of in an awkward position where we promised something that was not delivered. So
Right.
what we ended up doing was leaning more into the independence and the choice you'd get as an investor because you had access to more ways to invest with your money. And so it was really the benefit there was more around the flexibility, which actually really appealed to the type of customer who wanted to use the brokerage account. They weren't someone who was like, you tell me what to do and invest it for me. They were telling us, we want to decide. We love this. We spend tons of time researching the types of funds we want to pick. They wanted more of that choice and control rather than sort of having it on autopilot. And so that was the benefits we ended up leaning into in our messaging, which was very effective with that audience.
Yeah.
It was something that was true factually. It did provide that. It was something that wouldn't put us in a position where someone could claim that we were misleading in the promise that we made to the customer. So that's like one very concrete example where, again,
Sure.
you have to be really thoughtful in your messaging about what are we saying or what are we implying, what could be kind of taken away from interpretation, and how do we make sure that it's not the wrong interpretation that we want to give to our customer.
Right. Yeah, that's a really great example because you're focused on different types of benefits in that case, not specifically the outcomes, right? And often when you're just strictly B2B, you are focused on promoting the outcomes, right, that they can expect to achieve. But there's a lot of nuance here in a regulated industry. I remember at the telehealth company where I worked, we would sell to other dermatology practices, but the end user used our platform to engage with all the practices in our network. And we had to be really careful about language around like, we're going to cure you or we're going to, guarantee treatment or anything like that. Like there were lots of issues there. And then, of course, there were HIPAA considerations because it was health care. But the thing is,
Mhm.
like, we had to also mirror that language when we marketed to the providers, right? We were trying to bring providers in, and we had to give the providers content and language that they could also use and be in compliance with when they promoted it to their patients. So there was this sort of trickle down effect, right? Like that it's, and so that may be one of the things that is different. So what are some of the other differences as you've moved into B2B to C? What are some of the differences you see in getting those things accomplished? You hinted at a little bit in your example of the brokerage, but in a B2B to C motion, what's different about the process that to
Yeah.
stay in compliance? Yeah.
There are a few things. And as we talk about it, think about these as guardrails and not as constraints. I know you
Yeah.
and I chatted a little bit about that. I'm a big believer that these guardrails are there for a reason.
Yeah.
So companies don't do wrong things and customers are getting the right thing by them. And so that's my kind of point of reference as we're thinking about this. So when it comes to how the process is different, there are more stakeholders involved, most likely.
That has to be
Um,
frustrating
there
sometimes.
has, so yes, pros and cons, push and pull. Hopefully you're building a good relationship with those stakeholders, and that helps when you are having a little bit of a tug and war over the language that you're using in your messaging. In addition to the usual kind of culprits you're probably working with, you're likely working with compliance. You're working with legal teams.
Yeah.
You may be working with the chief medical officer,
Oh,
other folks who are on the clinical side. And so there are different points of view around messaging. And especially when I've worked with compliance and legal folks, like I do not want their job. I think it's incredibly tricky. They're always having to think of all the angles.
yeah.
But oftentimes they do look at messaging in a very black and white way. Like if we say this, we say this. We can't say this, we can't say this. And as a marketer, you're probably a little bit more creative. You
Sure.
want to take a little bit more creative liberties. Hey, we really want to use this phrase. It's powerful. We think it's going to stick out. Your legal team could say, no, we are very concerned about you using that phrase. And so you have more people who have a say in your messaging. And so there is more of that balancing act where you're trying to bring in their inputs. Their inputs are incredibly important.
Yeah.
Sometimes if I think if you really believe in something, like maybe there's a little bit of pushback, well, we really want to say this. So how can we say it in a way that you're comfortable with too?
Right.
And what that means is, in addition to more people that need to be engaged early in your messaging process. And
Yeah.
I've made the mistake in the past of bringing them in later. I've crafted the messaging, I've gone through review loops, and I think of legal and compliance as that final sign off. But what happens is if there is something in your messaging that they have concerns about, hey, we think this is giving the wrong impression, someone could interpret this in the wrong way, that means you're going back to the drawing board and redoing things and potentially rolling back work that's already been done. So you need
That's
to be
an
bringing them in
excellent point,
early.
Hannah. Yeah, bring them in earlier. And I do love the point you're making about bringing in the SMEs, right? The subject matter experts, because you can pick a word or be recommending some phrasing or terminology that means something different, right? Like you don't know that it might actually have a different meaning or a different connotation in the context of this without that subject matter expert giving you that context and that framing. That's happened to me before, where you're like, well, what if we say this? Oh, no, that means something different. We can't say that. So it's not like it's a
Yeah.
compliance or legal issue. It just actually means something different. So, yeah.
And sometimes the inverse where they recommend you use a certain word, but the reality is your customer does not even know what the heck that word means.
Oh,
And this happens
that,
a lot in healthcare where if you talk to the SMEs, they're rattling stuff off and you're trying to keep up and you're like, what does that mean? What does that mean? What does that mean? And I like to use, as much as I've been in the space for a bit, I'm still learning because there's just so much to learn. I try to use ignorance as an advantage. Like if I don't get it, the everyday person using this is not going to get it either. And I have made the mistake in the past of relying on explicitly the language I'm being told we should be using because it's from the experts. And then you roll it out and it doesn't resonate. People don't understand. They're actually confused. They're bringing in questions. And so you want that perspective. The context you're right is so important. They have a lot of the context that you may not have as a product marketer, but your job is to question everything and make sure at the end of the day, your messaging is in the words of your customer. How do they speak? How do they articulate things? When I say something to them, are they going to understand? Is it
yeah.
going to click? Is it going to resonate? And it's your job to sometimes be the interpreter there between the SME and your customer because the SME may not speak in the language of your customer. They're going to speak in the language of the product, of the industry, of the
Right.
space. And again, if for me, my end user and customers, often just everyday people like you and I, they're not healthcare experts. They don't know all the language. They just know I need to go to the doctor. How much does it cost?
Yes.
How do I access XYZ? And so sometimes you need to be the interpreter as you're building that
I
messaging.
think the interpreter term is a really great one, really appropriate for this. Um, I know we have other questions to get to. The the other thing we talked about in our prep call is the fact that now everybody can very easily generate content thanks to AI. I mean, they could before, but now they can do it fast and at scale. And how does that factor in, like, because there's a police, I hate to call it policing, but there's a need to monitor the content that is being put out, right? And so it's one thing if you as the product marketer or even whoever's in charge of content has control over what you have control over. But what happens in the wild? What's your experience? How does that look in reality?
I will admit this is something that I definitely, maybe in some cases, literally has kept me up at night. I feel a very strong sense of ownership over my messaging, and I think that's one of the number one jobs of the product marketer is to make sure that it's activated consistently across all your channels and the people that are using it. And so, while I don't want to be a police, I definitely don't want it to be the wild, wild west where everyone can kind of do what they want. So I first, like, I have to start by remembering like who is using or not using my messaging. You know, your marketing team, your sales team,
Yep.
customer success, product, hopefully your leadership team as well. Like, don't
Yeah.
forget them. At any moment, they could be talking to a prospect, a existing customer. They could be talking to an investor, even like a friend or family member who's like, "So, tell me about your company. What are they saying? What are they saying about your product?" Um,
Yeah.
I do think a couple things are helpful here, like bringing people into your messaging development is something I am really passionate about. Why? Because it builds a strong sense of contribution and ownership from
Right.
other folks in your messaging. And maybe I should take the word your out of it. It shouldn't be my messaging. It should be our messaging. Their fingerprint should be on it. If it's so, they're more likely to use it. Then they're using it and they're using it in the real world and they're thinking of it as helpful messaging, not just some fluff that someone in product marketing created where it's like, this is your messaging, but this is how I say it.
Right.
Bring
Yeah.
them into the process. That doesn't mean you bring every single person, but maybe pick a couple folks from these different teams to represent their team. Like, let's test this out. How does this feel like in real life? And bring them in as you're building it out, just like you are with compliance and legal, so that you're building that sense of like ownership over the messaging, which means they're more likely to use it rather than just
It's true.
developing
And they can
something
be
off the cuff.
extensions of your eyes and ears too, once it does get
Yes.
launched. So,
Yeah, once it's launched, create that feedback loop, right? Because sometimes, I mean, you can iterate on your messaging all you want, but I always like to say that you just got to get it out there, like in real life, and see what the reactions are, both verbally, even non-verbally, like in a meeting. What is the prospect like responding? What's
mhm.
their facial cues? You know, you can get some of that from your eyes and ears as people. If you have tools that are recording calls that you
Sure.
can ingest data from, you can monitor it that way. So bringing them in early really helps. And then I also am a big believer in having a consistent source of truth when it comes to your messaging. Oftentimes, in situations where I'm seeing that messaging isn't used consistently, it's because people, frankly, just don't know what the right messaging is. So they just build their own. Whether it's like a messaging one sheet that you have published and you distribute it internally, whatever the format of it is, you need to have a single source of truth that you're updating in real time, that's evergreen, that people can reference.
Yeah.
Otherwise, people will go and create their own. And if they are creating content, at least they're hopefully pulling from that messaging guide or that
Right. And
source of
they have very
truth to
clear
inform it.
guidelines in that document about the do's and
Exactly.
don'ts and the why, right? Like, okay,
And the
this is
why.
why you have to use this specific language, right? And avoid this. So, yeah.
Yeah. And then as you going back to the feedback loop, you know, once you've rolled that out, use all your channels, survey teammates. How is the messaging landing? What's clicking? What's not? What are people asking about? What are people not asking about? Take that feedback back, keep working on that messaging. I think a lot of times we put so much work into building it and then it's done and we're like, it's done. I don't have to worry about this anymore. But you do. You need to be continuously monitoring it. Messaging needs to be real. And things, market context changes, customer needs
Totally.
change, competitor dynamics change. Your messaging needs to evolve too. And so making sure that you keep coming back to that source of truth and updating it as
Yeah.
needed.
And I did not bribe, for the record, I did not bribe Hannah into teeing this up, but that's what Troupe is here to do, is not only be the hub where your messaging guide lives so everyone knows what to reference, but it's also constantly checking for alignment against what is being sent out, what is being said in the calls, how well is that aligned to your source of truth, and then also looking at even more what is the impact on pipeline. So I guess, as content goes out there and conversations happen, when things do start to go out of compliance, Hannah, what happens generally? What does that look like if you catch something and or you see something, or like it obviously has to get reined in pretty quickly, right?
Yeah, I mean, if it's out of compliance where you're saying something like you're very explicitly not should be saying. So in my earlier example, maybe I was
Mhm.
like, nope, I don't want to listen to you, team. I'm going to tell everyone that if you invest in this brokerage account, you're going to be wealthy in a year. Um, there are lots of potential ramifications. It could be something as small as a customer calling the support team and saying, wait, what? Is this true? It could be, in my case, I'm in a B2B2C world. It could be that end customer escalating something up to their internal team, who's their economic buyer, and saying, hey, wait, is this true? And then they escalate it up to their customer success manager. That customer success manager escalates it up to our team. Um, Hopefully, I mean, there's probably some situations, I haven't seen this personally, but I'm sure there's companies out there that have probably said things and gotten sued later.
Right. Yep.
So there's
Fine.
there's
Yep.
all sorts of ramifications that could come out of it, large, small, medium. But at the end of the day, I don't want any of them to happen. I don't want to make promises we can't keep. I don't want to sort of imply things that aren't true. At the end of the day, it will erode your credibility and trust in your product and your brand, and that has a huge trickle stream effect, whatever you want to call it. And
Sure.
so lots of potential ramifications. Again, it goes back to why you need to be engaging folks who can help think of those ramifications long in advance of you activating your messaging for any real audience.
Yeah, that's great. We talked about the persona, the cycle, or the food chain of personas here in B2B2C. I don't really know how else to characterize it other than a food chain.
Food chain, might work. It's a
But
chain, a chain.
it is, it's a chain. So in a B2B2C situation, if you're selling, if your customer that you're making revenue off of is a business, so that's the B2B piece, but that business is then selling their service to the consumer. I'm curious your take of how you think about the hierarchy of messaging and how you prioritize the messaging, because my experience has been that you're messaging to the business that you're trying to sell to, but you also have to at the same time, like simultaneously, think about it from the end consumer's perspective too. So there's this sort of art that goes into this. Like, how do you approach this, Hannah? Like, how much weight do you put on the consumer's lens, which is the ultimate end user of this food chain, um, versus the business's perspective? How do you find the balance that you want to strike?
It's a really good question. At the end of the day, your B2B, your buyer audience is the one that's deciding whether they're going to purchase your product, whether they're going to renew and keep working with it. And so I think oftentimes in these B2B2C worlds, there is a probably more emphasis placed on the B2B audience, and product marketers often spend more of their time focused on what's the right messaging and ways to persuade this audience that our product is the right fit for them. And then as we onboard them and they're a customer, how do we retain them?
Yeah.
I think that's wrong to put too much emphasis there. I think there's a ton of sort of influence that your end users have. Although you may not see it right away, over time as they're using your product, if they're unhappy, they're going to let those people know. If I'm working in the benefit space and we're selling a product to an employer audience who's then offering it to their employees as part of their benefits package, if people hate their benefits, they're going to tell their HR team, right? Like they're going to do an annual survey and they're going to say, this sucks, I hate it,
Yeah.
get this other thing. And so making sure that that end user audience is really happy and satisfied with the product is equally important. And I try to balance both.
Mm,
I know that we need to make a promise to the economic buyer about how this product is going to add value and solve a problem for them and for the end user who's
right.
their, in this case, employee audience. And so what has to be true is your core value prop needs to stay the same. And I start there before I work on the messaging, like what is the value proposition and how can it be true between both audiences who have very different problems, jobs to be solved, motivations, barriers, all of that. So I need to define like what's universal and then what's unique. And then I actually create messaging for each audience. So I don't think there's like a one size fits all messaging that's going to work
Oh,
because again, totally different worlds, how they're thinking about the product is different. So
yeah.
for the B2B audience, my messaging is often communicating around ROI, administrative ease. Hey, if you offer this, it can help improve these types of outcomes for your workforce. And here's why that matters. For the consumer audience, the messaging is often focused around, ease of use and the utility and the personal benefits to you as a human rather than the benefits to the business, because obviously they don't care about the business in that sense. So you need to have, I think, two layers of messaging. Your value proposition needs to be overarching and true among both, but I actually create like a messaging guide for the B2B side
Okay.
and then for the consumer side. And then the teams that are creating content and marketing campaigns for each of those audiences, they're referencing the right source of truth. And that way we have messaging that's relevant for the people that we're talking to rather than saying like, well, let's just build one and hope it like is all encompassing and will
Yeah.
work for everyone because it's not going to.
That's excellent advice. Hannah, as you're describing that, it's making me think, oh my gosh, these are more personas that I have to understand, right? And if you're a solo PMM, oh my gosh. But I mean, it's hard enough to understand the personas just on the B2B side of the equation, but now you have to also really understand what matters to the consumer, the ultimate consumer at the end of this cycle as well. How like that feels really challenging in terms of just getting to know all these personas.
It
You're like,
is,
yes.
it definitely keeps you busy. I actually really like it. Like I grew up in B2B. I love B2C. Um, I don't know that I would want to like commit fully to B2C. I love that I get to do both, not just from a messaging perspective, but even how we go to market, how we think about marketing strategies. Like there's the B2B side and then there's the B2C side, and you kind of get to do both.
Yeah.
It does stretch you pretty far. But I think it allows you to also be really creative in thinking about how do you really talk to humans as humans. I think
Yeah.
oftentimes when we're talking to B2B audiences, they are very much human, but they're also putting their own like business role lens on when they're thinking about your product. And so I think there's just honestly more room for creativity and how you're thinking about talking to your consumer audience.
Yeah.
And it forces you to think about your product in different ways too. And honestly, I think it keeps me really grounded as a product marketer because I'm always grounded in the human side of it. And how do people like me experience this? How do people like my family members experience this? What do they care about? How do I help them along the way through this product and messaging it? And so I really enjoy that like human focused grounding there, which I think in B2B is important too. I think it's a little harder to get to because again, you're really focused on the whole, business value and all of that rather than the human value.
Yeah, well put, Hannah. And, speaking of the human connection, we teased at the top that you're involved with the Product Marketing Alliance as an ambassador. How did you get involved in that? And what do you get out of it in terms of relationships that you're meeting with the people in the alliance?
Product Marketing Alliance has been a big part of my career journey. I joined or when I first started in product marketing. I didn't know what I didn't know. I wanted to find and build a community of people and just soak in as much knowledge as I could that I could apply in my day to day. So I joined, I quickly immersed myself in the community, got to know people, soaked in all those great resources they have. Along the way, the opportunity came to really lean in more as an ambassador and help other product marketers in their career paths too. And so I've been doing that for the last several years, attending events online and in person, contributing information. They recently, I think in the fall, launched a mentoring program through
Yeah.
Venture Loop that I've been a part of too. It's been really huge in helping me be better at my craft, but then
Right.
also as I'm learning, giving back to other people and sharing things in real time. And product marketers are so hungry for that. They don't just want the concepts, they want the real examples, right? Like, walk me through this. How did you approach it?
Yeah.
And I think a lot of that has been brought about through PMA. Like, they're really trying to help facilitate that. And it's the people that are part of the community that I think are making it happen. And the people, the network, the community, that's been my biggest, I think, takeaway from my experience with PMA is just having that community that I can tap into and be a part of is just incredibly fulfilling. And more recently, I was a solo PMM. You're solo, but you're not. Like, you need that community of fellow people in your corner. And I think PMA has been a big part of helping make that happen.
Oh, that's really cool. I'm glad to hear that. And I know Troupe is super excited to be really involved with PMA this year and a bunch of different events and programs. So, and to meet fellow professionals like you that we can also learn from as well as we develop our product and offering. So, Hannah, really appreciate you taking the time today. This has been a great conversation. Wish you luck with your B2B2C in a regulatory climate. And yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you, Jennifer.